Thank you for everybody who signed up to speak. Okay, board members, we will continue on with our discussion on this presentation. I know, Sarah, what's up? Yeah, Sarah, if you want to come back up. Thanks for your patience. I know, Ms. Bike, you had.
Yeah,
yep.
Thank you. I'm curious if you could, tell me about our librarians and what it takes to qualify to apply for a job as a librarian in Knox County Schools.
Sure. My apologies for the cough. I have 2 children of daycare age, and germs are the one thing they share really well. So in Tennessee, and it's regulated by the state like other teacher licenses, there are 3 things that are required. It's the teaching license, the library media endorsement as an add-on to that license, and a master's degree. There are different ways of arriving at those 3 things in different university programs. You can do them all in once as kind of a bundle. If teachers take a different route to come with us, then they can get them piecemeal. But those are the 3 qualifications.
When they have the master's degree or these other qualifications, I assume that these are accredited. Is that checked that they're in some way?
Yeah, there are a couple of different accrediting agencies, and those mirror the accreditation process for any other kind of teacher education program. But there's background behind that, and then universities regulate that.
Okay. What type of master's degree would they have to have? Would it be any?
You can go through it by any route in Tennessee as long as you have the content area endorsement. The usual, what we call library school, because it makes us feel like med school, that degree would probably be either a master's degree in library science, in library and information science, or just information science minus the latter. But it'll be some combination of LIS in that case, but it's not uncommon for teachers to have a master's in reading or a master's in curriculum instruction, or I had a co-librarian early in my career whose master's was in deaf education, so anyone with a master's in another field, if they want to come into librarianship, they can do, instead of doing another full master's degree in library science, they can do an endorsement-only program, which would be about the same length usually as if you did an endorsement program for like an administrator's certification. It's about the same number of credit hours. If you did one of those, it would be coming from one of these master's programs, graduate schools most likely, just not the full master's degree.
Okay. And then also you talked about in this process and some of the new things that that there would be a group of librarians. How are those librarians chosen?
What we hope for, and this has not been fully written out yet, but what we hope for and what we've talked about with some people in focus groups as we've started to draft these ideas is to the best of our ability to look at a rotation so that everybody has a chance to serve. There are slightly over 15 middle schools and high schools, so if we had 5 members on each of those committees at a time, then in a 3-year cycle we could get through most of them, and we hope that that would be a good learning experience for each of them to participate.
Okay, thank you. That's all of my questions. I do have some comments. Do we want to do questions first, or do we want to go into comments?
Yeah, go
Is
ahead.
there a, okay. I'm a mother of 2 children, and my kids went to Sequoia Elementary. One is still at Sequoia Elementary, and I've had the privilege to spend some time in that library, a handful of mornings, stacking books for Miss Clark. I think it's 5 or 6 years now, and I've always appreciated the collection that she's kept, and on days that she's been absent when I've volunteered, she's left little notes, and during holiday times she always pulls out like specific holiday books, and they really seem to reflect what the kids want to read and really getting them involved, and I feel so good as a parent that am welcomed into the library and that I can be a part of that, because I'm not going to claim to be a professional in reading or books or anything like that, and I like to see what the kids are reading these days and what my kids are interested in and stuff like that, and what other kids are interested in, because also my daughter had some reading issues. She's now in middle school at Bearden Middle School, and I would often ask the librarian, she's interested in this stuff, but she's really struggling, so it needs to be a lower level. Can you give me recommendations? And I've really, really always appreciated that I had that openness, and I hope that all parents really feel welcome to kind of be a part of this. I really like that we're bringing some parents in to be a part of some of these groups, and I think that that's really important, and I think we're making some good progress in this. And then my last comment is kind of going back to talking about like books of different demographics that happen to be at other schools versus other schools and things like that. And I come from a very poor rural farming family where my mom was the only of her family and the first of her family to even graduate high school. The abuse that happened in my mom's family, I don't want to speak about, but it was not pleasant that my mom experienced and her siblings and my cousins. And the fact that they didn't have books and that many of them tried to take their lives, I wonder if they had had books that helped explain some of what they were going through, would have helped them. And I welcome that. I'm very privileged to be a part of my kids' life and to have those conversations, but for kids that don't have anyone to explain what might be happening to them, I think that that's really important. So I'm really glad we're making this process better. Thank you.
Mr. Triplett?
Yeah, I do appreciate the work of our librarians. I know they work hard and sometimes thankless, and I appreciate your work in putting this together and figuring all this out. And I know that's a little bit challenging, and I understand some of the concerns. I did have a couple of questions on these sensitive titles. What is so we've got people reviewing them. You're going to have some, these are going to be reviewed. But what standard, I guess, do we hold them to? We have, a policy that talks about some things about how things are, picked for our libraries and instructional materials, that kind of thing. Well, I guess what standard will they be reviewed against?
It is difficult in librarianship to define that, because what you've done when you've published a book is you've taken a slice of reality and tried to pin it between pages. In trying to define a standard, you have to predict what might be all those realities that we would ever be able to. And so what we find typically in the field is that the best thing that we can do is drive it back to multiple criteria. If there's anyone who's ever found a single standard by which things can be judged, I don't know them. I'm sure they would make a lot of money. But what the typical approach and what the approach in our policy is to drive it back to quite a few different criteria and to try to try to use the preponderance of evidence and just make the best decision possible. You end up with a lot of different data points in that. And one thing that I think was really helpful from Ms. Lautner's presentation last month was really looking at how you have to, each data point in isolation really doesn't tell a story. It's knitting them together where you start to get a good understanding. And I think there's a really good parallel there with how those decisions end up getting made. So the criteria that are available in our policy, I think it's helpful just to point out it's the same criteria in our selection policy as in our reconsideration policy. So literally what we do in reconsideration is we reconsider, was this a good decision and is it still a good decision, trying to go back to that original decision point on those criteria and give it a fresh look.
And this may be a question for Keith or Dr. Isaac, will there be an administrative procedure that comes out of that sort of lays out that criteria for folks, or?
I would say, again, I think that the criteria coming back to the policy exists already just in terms of what is looked at in terms of those materials. I think adjustments to the administrative procedure would be more around the addition of these new steps that we've talked about, and being part of how we go about both managing and constantly reviewing our titles and things like that.
I guess my challenge is, when I part of the catalyst for this was some books that I feel are inappropriate for the age group. I don't think belong in a school, and I'm not interested in banning all the books. I appreciate a review process. I think that makes some sense. But if we're just going to review them by the same standards we always have, I guess the question is, why go through the process of reviewing if they're already there, right? They've been, in theory, held up to this standard. So I guess what's different? I guess I don't look at. I appreciate the review and I appreciate the work, and I think that a review process is good. I think reviewing some of these sensitive titles is good, I guess. But if they've already passed the standard, what's going to be different the next time we review it?
I hope what's fresh in this approach is just having a lot more voices involved. The traditional approach has been, because we honor and value that expertise of the librarian in each building and that detailed training that they've gone through, they have been positioned sort of as the sole deciders. What we really hope by the addition of these two layers is that on the sensitive title review committee, we'd have multiple librarians, because they're going to look at each of those criteria differently. There will be some subjective nature. Anytime you line the content of a book up against this list of criteria, it's not going to be clear how they necessarily align, and there will be a point at which each person makes a call. And so I think when you get more people at the table, you get a much better view of how that call is going to come out. Librarians value that too. When we've had focus groups telling them, just getting some feedback about this idea in development, they've said, oh yes, I would love to have that opportunity to talk to my colleagues, because many of them disagree. And that's why we see different collections in different schools, in addition to trying to customize based on the feedback available. We also see different decision making among our librarians. So I think we would see that come out as a new layer within that committee, and then I think especially the new layer would be coming back to these building level committees, because then it's not just librarians in the process. And so we hope that all of those perspectives would, given the inevitable subjective nature of some of these decisions, we hope that having all of those perspectives at the table would just bring a lot more richness to that decision-making process.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate you explaining all that. And I know all of this wasn't created in a vacuum. I know you had help and folks that worked with you. And I guess I would just give a challenge that I think I believe what we need is at least a base standard. I think we would clearly state that we wouldn't want pornography in the school, but if it's just up to a few votes, that could get in, right? So I would think that from a central office level, I know that we have differing viewpoints, and I wouldn't want everything I disagree with removed from the school, right? I wouldn't want that at all. But at the same time, I would think we would need like a base standard somewhere to say, like, this is the base standard that we're gonna start from, and then we're gonna review some sensitive titles, and we're gonna look at some other things. But I would challenge you to develop some sort of base level that parents know that this kind of content is not available, and it's not every time you find the word sex in a book, we're not say to get rid of that book. I understand that, but at the same time, there should be a base standard that folks can trust. Knox County schools won't have these in. And then the other question, one more question, then I'll leave it up and let somebody else talk. But the state has a law related to obscene materials. Mr. Duper's not here, so Mr. Sanders did not feel prepared to answer those questions, and that's okay. I understand that. Is that something that our current protocol says it's got to be a parent from a school, of a child in that school that questions a book, and that's how it gets reviewed initially? I know you're going to review sensitive titles that you find other places. The state law, if I felt like something was obscene and I don't have a child in Knox County schools, can I appeal that decision without going directly through the normal process? Do we know?
For the state review process
Yes.
specifically.
Does it have
for
to
that
follow
appeal,
the process in Knox County and then go to the state, or?
it stipulates that that process is designed to appeal district level decisions. So
Gotcha.
the expectation that is that if it goes to them, it's gone through the first steps.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Mrs. Horn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Sarah, for this presentation. This is helpful. I think that, obviously this is a complex issue. We've had conversations about it, and it's very nuanced, and it can be complex based on various opinions. And I think that our reconsideration policy is important because opinions do vary widely. And I think also that the good thing I think about having 5 to 7 people on a group is that the trained professionals may not represent the viewpoint of the community. And so I really like that we have various people represented in that group. I think that's very important. And I think 2 concerns that I had made note of, and then I heard from a couple of speakers that I would hope we would pay particular attention to, and Mr. Triplett touched on one of those regarding sexually explicit materials and how books are chosen and that kind of thing. I think in our policy, and just based on what we're expected to do by the state regarding Tennessee state standards, our policy says that books should be chosen that satisfy a need for educational purpose. So I would hope that as we're reviewing books that is particularly noted. And I think that it's difficult to make blanket statements, but I think when we think about specifically visual images, that we need to be very cautious on what is included and offered in books, because there are a lot of examples that I don't think would add value to students or would be supported by our Tennessee state standards, because those standards certainly don't include a lot of those explicit images. So I think based on those standards, based on our policy, I think we have some books in our schools that should not be there. So I would hope that we would take care of that sooner rather than later. And then the other, let's see, I think, or maybe that did touch on both of them. I think it actually did. That's kind of the big thing is I understand that, as Mr. Triplett also said, I may not like every book that's in there. I'm not saying we should look at these things with a broad brush, but I do think that we need to be extremely sensitive to the fact that we're spending taxpayer dollars on these books, and they should be books that are age appropriate for students, and that we should not be. I understand teenagers may be having sex. We shouldn't be promoting that they do that, and we should not be spending money, the taxpayers' money, in such books. And I think we need to keep that at a very high priority in our minds. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Horn. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Sarah. Also want to thank the community for coming out. There's many, many opinions that have been shared, and it's obviously a topic that hits home because it's based on values, it's based on viewpoint. And I would expect everybody in this room feels something about this topic, I would guess. And I appreciate the differing of opinions. I do want to give a little shout out to West High, though, because that's where my daughter goes. I didn't know that West High had a library association, with student representatives, which I think is fantastic. I would never even thought to join that when I was in school. So the fact that there's students who care and are that passionate about what's happening in our libraries, I think is important, and I think it's great always when we have student reps, no matter what their viewpoints are, when they're coming and sharing with us, because we need to hear more and more from our students. Sarah, with that, I do have one question that I know you addressed a lot in terms of our collections at the beginning and kind of how that works and what a librarian does to kind of help make that work. The thing I didn't really hear and I just wasn't clear about is when we use the word collection and we think about building it, I know that individual collections live in individual school libraries, but are we thinking about the collection by school, by grade band, by district? Like, define the collection, I guess, is what I'm asking. And in terms of the process that you laid out, when you say collection, at what level are you talking about a collection?
Thank you for that last clarification. So in that case, we'd be looking at the building level collection because that's the primary set of materials that would be available to any given child. So easiest way to think of it, if you walk into West High School's library, right. What do you see on your shelves? That's the collection. We would also consider digital materials part of that collection. Yep. And occasionally you get something fun in a different format. But that would be the main thing, is looking within a building and what is primarily available inside that building. My
assumption is that's probably a pretty intentional decision in practice. Why? Why do it at that level?
So it's intentional. It's also historical. I think the historical reason was that before we had the internet, that's all we could control was right. What's literally in your building. We do it that way now because that's where the preponderance of feedback is going to come from to inform that needs assessment. Right. And a lot of that is, to Ms. Horn's point, coming from those educational purposes and those educational programming, because we have state standards that theoretically define a consistent experience for all of our students at a given grade level, but we know, because we've met schools, that we end up with tremendous variations, and those variations are often at the building level. So for instance, I too have a soft spot in my heart for West because that's where I was a building level librarian, and so one of the biggest examples from my own experience that I would give as where you might see big variations in the educational programming is I was there when the IB program was first implemented, mm-hmm. and I assisted with the extended essay that those students write as part of their diploma program. And what we realized as we started to teach students to write this extended essay, which was a very different assignment than anything they would get in their standard level curriculum, that we needed to give some different instruction on topic selection. So we changed up our topic selection instruction, and what we instantly found was that students were interested in subjects that weren't being taught in their standard curriculum. They were interested in psychology and how you interpret dreams, and the criminal justice system and things like that. And so that really told us we have to invest some funds here, and that was a budget strategy that other schools would not use because they would not have that driver in their instructional programming coming from that. Given our modern technology, we do have some options to think about expanding our collections outside the four walls. Our librarians keep up a hefty traffic on our email listserv, borrowing items from each other, but we also have formal lending relationships with the Knox County Public Library, and which we use occasionally. What we more often use is a lending arrangement with UT's library, primarily at the high school level, often for those kids in advanced classes, whether it's IB, whether it's AP, or something like that, to access things that aren't in our collection. And that helps us be thoughtful, too, with our use of funds, because by extending outside our four walls, we can use our funds primarily on the things we know are big drivers within our building, but we can think about how to be really efficient with gaining additional resources from the outside. So that gives us a way to kind of expand those resources, but again, based on case by case.
So is it fair to say then that across all of our collections within even a particular grade band, so like high school, that there would probably be quite a bit of variety?
Yes.
And that's intentional?
Yes.
Is it also fair to say then that that variety has probably evolved and changed quite a bit as culture changes, right? As the culture shifts, our collections will likely shift too. And there's probably books that are no longer in our libraries that people would have deemed pretty appropriate probably 40, 50, 60 years ago that we as a society would no longer deem appropriate, correct? So I think one of the things that I'm hearing in this conversation, I think there's I'm hearing two things in the conversation. One is, what process does Knox County Schools use? What's the right process to try to get at a healthy collection that honors the variety of viewpoints and the educational purposes that our students have? I'm also hearing another conversation, and that conversation is, what is the baseline in terms of appropriateness for a given society at a given time? And that changes. And I certainly don't want to be the person who gets to make that ultimate decision for any one group of people. And I don't think as a board member, that's really my role or our role, is to claim at this one point that this is the baseline of what we consider healthy or not as a society. And in that, I can also say that I have a set of values that that I stick to, and that I expect my family to not stick to, because they're all human too and they get to make their choices, but that I want to inform them and help them understand. And so to me, in a pluralistic society, the only way you get at what is that standard at any one moment, because I think it shifts. I mean, I think it absolutely shifts. And maybe the word is better, guideline, than a standard. State standards, to me, are different than what we're talking about. I would think that that's the minimum expectation that you all are operating with as librarians. I think the way you have to do that as a pluralistic society is you have to gather enough of that society, those stakeholders, to have good, hard conversations that also allow for people to bring in their bias, because it's really hard to completely divorce yourself from it, but also to bring in good research and training and how do we do this, right? Like, I don't just bring my bias to the table. I've got to bring some other things to the table. I've got to have other tools in the toolbox. And so to me, what I appreciate about this is you all, before you even came, did some work to get ahead of it and say, hey, how do we need to modify and shift and adapt our process? I don't know that I'm the expert in the room to say, man, you nailed it, or, here's some other things that I might shift. I think the idea that I did hear that I actually liked was having some student representation on the school library councils. I think that could be helpful. I know some folks at West High would jump up on it, and there's probably others too. But to me, that's the best we can hope for. And again, my comments are not saying that there's no baseline. There is. But you get to that through wrestling it out. And I don't think any one group gets to own that and claim that for anybody else. And I mean that. I mean any group. I don't think any group should get to decide that. And so, again, I appreciate the work on the process. This is not the first time that you've been before the board, and I've learned more about librarians and the work that they do. As somebody who's never met one in person and had a long conversation, I've got my images of what librarians are, right? And I'm sure we all do. But the reality is, I think you all play a pivotal role in our society because, again, as culture changes, what we access changes, or what we want to access and what we collect and what we curate changes. The last comment I'll make is, I can honestly say, as a parent of 3 kids, now 19, 18, and 14, I've never fought with them about what they accessed in the library. I don't say that to minimize people who have. That's not why I say that. But I think we have a lot of other challenges out there that we have to face. And I've also learned as a parent that I cannot completely shelter and monitor my kids and what they're doing. Not in today's world. I just can't. I tried to fight that battle for a little bit. I lost really bad. And to me, as a parent, I think the thing that I want to shift into and how I want to be better as a parent is I want to be prepared to have really good conversations with my kids and help them be good thinkers and how to wrestle with the content that they are going to be exposed to, that they are going to face, whether or not I like it or not. I mean, they are. And to me, that's how I would want to posture myself. And I hope as a community, we can do that, because what our kids need to feel from us is not alienation, but, hey, you're willing to be in the mess with me, and you're willing to help me kind of make decisions and figure some things out. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Christie?
Thank you, and thank you, Sarah. First of all, I appreciate this and the work you do. I can't imagine being a librarian right now in the current climate nationwide. And just One question, do we have any systems in place where parents can opt their students out of materials? Or is that something we could look at if we do not already have it?
I would, it's not systematized, it's an individual basis, but I would strongly encourage any parent who's got a concern to make contact with their librarian, and they want to take care of their kids. Librarians want the same thing as parents, and every school library has a public-facing website. They can find it as a branch off from their school website, and if they have any trouble, they can let my staff know, and we'll be happy to help them get in contact.
Okay, so that is something parents could use, I mean,
Yes.
as an avenue.
Yes,
if
our
there are
librarians are
materials.
masterful at ensuring that if they're doing that as part of a partnership with a family, that there's no stigma attached to the child.
Okay, and they would just need to reach out to the school librarian. Okay, thank you. Just a couple of other notes. As far as, I mean, I think we can all agree we do not want pornography in our schools. You know, when we talk about baselines, I do worry that maybe it will catch some of those books that we do want in our schools. So I do think we need to be careful about having very rigid baselines, because a lot of that, you know, just different people have different opinions. So I would be just caution that there might be unintended consequences there. And I do think we need to be mindful of that. I do like having more eyes, and love the idea of having a parent on it as well. And I do appreciate the work you put into this. And then, I know you all get tired of hearing me say this, but I'm going to say it again. Since we are talking about children being exposed to explicit material or predators, I would also caution parents that they need to be mindful about what their kids are accessing on their devices. I mean, we're talking about social media, YouTube, streaming services, online gaming platforms, and there are people out there that want to target your children and can send them private messages, and they have it right there on their phones all day. I know that's kind of off topic, but, you know, just it does go along with some of what parents are worried about in this discussion.
Thank you. Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Triplett may have already answered my question for Mr. Sanders. Are you able to talk about the Miller test, or is that best saved for another time?
That is best saved for another time. And these issues are very complex from a legal perspective, and Gary has done a lot of good work with the schools, helping you draft policies, helping you draft procedures. I'm not going to try to step into it at a moment's notice, so I'm going to leave that to Mr. Dupler.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. So, holding that over for another time, the thing that I would like to most point out is that our librarians have a responsibility to look at the work as a whole, and that's important to considering all of those pieces, considering its value or its lack of value. And so if we are taking a look at a teeny piece of it, or even selections from it or photos from it, then when we're looking at those individual pieces might very easily be considered to be inappropriate or obscene, but those pieces have to be considered as part of the whole when we're looking at it. So I would encourage board members, when you're looking at those things, to be sure that you have read the work in its entirety to make those decisions. Thank you.
Mr. Triplett?
I just want to make one more comment. I've heard several times from several different people that, you know, I know culture shifts, people change, opinions change, feelings change, communities are different. And I'm well aware of that, and I understand that there are differences, and I do understand that culture does change over time. But I just simply want to say that absolute truth is not. And there is absolute truth. And if we will live by that, we are far better off for it. And if we will measure our lives by that, we will be better off for it. So that's simply all I want to say.
Thank you, Mr. Triplett. I agree. Reverend Butler?
So We have a policy, so let's follow the policy. And if at one level is not resolved, you go to the next level. If it's not resolved there, you go to the next level. And then if it's not resolved, they come to the board. If it's not resolved, it goes to the state. We have a policy. We've talked about this a lot, and we end up in the same place every time. So let's work the policy, and if the policy doesn't work, then we would have to change it. But we haven't worked the policy. I haven't been on the board long. I keep on saying I'm new. I was told I can't say I'm new anymore. But none have come to the board yet. I'm not sure how many have gone to the central office. I'm not sure how many gone past a certain point. I do know there are 3 books you're looking at. They were reported. So is that the reason why you're looking at them?
Those are books that we're just aware of that on a broad scale are widely considered to have some sensitive value. One of those has had some attention locally. I think there's plenty of room when we think about the huge perspectives, including what we've seen in this room tonight, that there's certainly room for questions on the other 2. And that's where we want to really think about that proactive approach. The main reason we picked those 3 was thinking about the wide sources about what's considered sensitive. We really wanted to make sure that we were testing different types of books. Is primarily what you're seeing on that list. So it was important to us to thoroughly test the process by seeing how it comes out with more than one type of text, and so that's a lot of what you're seeing there.
So then, if they were reported, if it's not resolved at that level, it goes to another level. Mm-hmm. The other thing I'd say is I agree that there is truth. But one of the things I found out, and a lot of people may not know, I'm a pastor. I pastor an African Methodist Episcopal church. And we have our name Zion. We call ourselves Zion. And one of the things I found out just from the study of ministry, I have a doctorate in ministry, is that even among church folk, there's not necessarily absolute truth. Tonight, I've heard some very eloquent young people speak, and I've heard some other folk who spoke, and I agree with some of what both of you all have said. I sit at a point where I don't want any of our children, no matter what school they go to be subject to information that's going to harm them in any way. But also, I don't want to have anyone to have information held from them that can help them in some way. So I think that we have a process that helps us with that. There are going to be some folk who's been trained to do that work, and that they have to go through the process. And I don't think it's going to be a baseline. And the reason is because you just got to look at each case and say, is this book a book we should have in our school? And if the answer is no, then you take it out. It can be gotten somewhere else. If you say yes and it's not agreed upon, you go to the next level. The last thing I would say is, and I say this as graciously as I can, I think you speak for your school. You speak for your community. I don't think you use someone else's community to make your point. I don't, and I just be honest and say it straight. When someone mentions Austin East, and they're not from Austin East, you can't say what Austin East thinks. You can't say what Austin East feels. And I'm saying it as graciously as I can because my son is 2,800. And so he graduated in 2012 valedictorian, went to Penn, Wharton School of Business. We're proud of all he's done. He's working hard now for his church, for his community. And I could probably say every book he ever read, I read. And some of the books he read, I'm like, boy, you reading this? And we talk about it. And some of the things I say, no, you can't have that. No, that's not, we're not reading that. And so I'm saying this to say that we have this situation, this discussion, and we can talk about it every board meeting, and it's not going to resolve it. We have a process, we have a policy. Let's utilize it. And as we utilize it, let's get better at utilizing it. Because I, for one, do not want to spend another hour talking about this at the school board meeting.
Thank you, Reverend Butler. Sarah, I just want to thank you for, guiding us through this, and I really appreciate that these new steps do involve, more stakeholders as an added support. I love that it is more proactive versus reactive, and, you also went through the current process, which I think is important for parents, to highlight for parents, because, a lot of times they don't know how to use that, and so you even highlighting that, I think, is a benefit for parents. I was talking to somebody recently from another state, and we were talking about book programs, and she said to me, oh, we don't even have libraries in a certain community. And I assumed she meant public libraries. She meant their schools don't have libraries because they're more rural and a poor school system. And that shocked me. I think we take for granted that we are blessed that we have libraries, and thank you for working with us on this process. I do, like I said last meeting, I do believe in academic freedom and exposure to diverse ideas, but not sexually explicit imagery. And I think that this process will help. And I really appreciate all the work that you've put into this. So thank you for that. I think everybody, Sarah, did you have anything?
Nope, I was just making sure I got everybody.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you. I think we should probably take a break. And then it'll give some of our guests a chance to stretch their legs or leave if they've spoken and are ready to leave. So we'll come back in about 10 minutes.
So give me time to eat more Snickers.